So due to the two results of me winning and Levon losing, I qualify for the semifinals, but more importantly, I am now mathematically guaranteed to qualify for the FIDE Candidates Tournament, which will be held in Spain in June and July. And for those who are wondering, the winner of that Candidates Tournament, which is 8 players, will earn the right to play Magnus Carlsen, the current chess world champion, in a match for the world title. And welcome back, everybody. Today we will be looking at my 6th and final round matchup against Andrey Esipenko from the group stage here in the 3rd and final leg of the FIDE Grand Prix in Berlin. So obviously going to this round, there were a lot of scenarios that were very, very complicated. At the very least, I knew that I needed to put in a good result today, try to draw the game at the very least, possibly win. I knew that if I drew my game and Levon lost, that would be very, very good for me. I also knew that if I won my game today, I probably would qualify outright for the Candidates Tournament. So without further ado, let's jump right into the game. So the game starts with e4 here, and now I play pawn to e5. Andrey plays bishop to c4, and now I play knight f6, d3, and now I play knight c6, and Andrey plays knight c3. So this is basically the Vienna opening. Now, one thing that people who have watched my stream on Twitch will have noticed is that I've actually played this a lot with the white side. So going into this game, there are a lot of thoughts running through my mind. First of all, the most obvious thought was, well, I could play bishop b4, knight to e2, and then d5. Now, I've had this position, I'm going to estimate probably at least 20 plus times against the strong Armenian Grandmaster Robert Hovhannissian before playing from the white side. So I first thought was maybe I would play bishop b4, but then I thought, you know what, I can also play knight a5, similar to what Magnus did against me in Norway chess many years back. So I play knight a5 here, and now Andrey plays queen f3. Now it's worth noting that this position has occurred before. I think I had a game in this position against the Russian Grandmaster Pavel Pankratov, if I'm not mistaken, during one of the World Blitz and Rapid Championships in 2019. At any rate, this definitely was a little bit of a surprise to me. The idea behind queen f3 is quite simple. White wants to go queen g3, develop the knight to e2, but also control this central d5 square and prevent me from pushing my pawn there. So now I play knight takes c4. D takes c4 is played, and I go d6. Now again, objectively it'd be nice if I could move the bishop out to say c5, for example, but after bishop c5, white has a couple of very attractive options. The first one is bishop g5, pinning the knight. There's also potentially queen g3, attacking both the pawns on e5 and g7 as well. So instead I play d6 here, and the idea is very simple. I'm not really considering pushing the pawn to d5 here. Obviously, white is controlling it with 4 pieces, the knight, the 2 pawns, and the queen. So I'm not really worried about that. And additionally, after d6, my pawns in the center will be very, very stable here. So for example, if white goes queen g3, now there's really no threat, so I just go knight h5. So knight g2 is played. I play bishop to e6, attacking the pawn on c4. b3 is played by Andrey, and now I go bishop to e7, and here he castles, I castle, and now a4 is played, and now I play this move knight d7. Now, one thing that's really important in top level chess is remembering previous games you've played, or even structures and setups. Now, again, for the people who want to do some fact checking, I actually played something similar to this, except without castling to the king side against Levon Aronian. I believe it was in one of the St. Louis online events in, I'm going to say mid 2021, where basically I did something like this, and Levon actually played this bishop g5 idea against me. So I was aware of this idea, and now in this position it's definitely a little bit different trying to play knight d7 and bishop g5, but having seen Levon play it, even though I'd castled my king to the queen side, I knew that it was a viable concept. So here Andrey plays a5, and now I play a6. Now it was very committal playing knight d7 here because I knew that Andrey wanted to play a5 and a6. I could have played a5 here, and the idea is quite simple. After say bishop e3 b6, let's just say white plays rook d1 knight d7. I have a flying V here in the center of the board. Also, my knight can go to c5, and white really has no breaks here. So if I could get this optimal setup, I would be doing very well. However, during the game, I rejected a5 because I thought after knight g3, if I go knight d7 here, I'm a little bit too slow as white can play knight f5. And now if I go bishop g5, white has this very nasty move queen g3, threatening the pawn on g7, and the bishop is under attack on g5 as well. So therefore, I chose to play knight d7, and Andrey played a5 here right away. Now, in the game, I played a6 instantly, and in retrospect, I actually was kind of curious what Andrey would have done if I had played this move f5. Now, the primary reason that I did not play f5 here was because Andrey was still moving instantly, so I assumed he was in preparation. Therefore, I didn't really consider f5 seriously, but as soon as I played a6, I did wonder if I could have played f5 here. Now, once again, I will also add the computer actually says after f5, e takes f5, Rook takes f5, queen b7, knight c5, queen b4. Apparently white is a little bit better here, but there is a lot of play potentially, and it's not concrete whatsoever. So this would have been an interesting try by me, but again, Andrey is moving so fast here that I figured it's best not to gamble, and it's best to play a practical move like a6. It's worth noting, if I play a move like bishop g5 and white gets this pawn to a6 here, I'm always gonna have some weaknesses here on the queen side, like white can stash the knight on d5 here, and he's always targeting these pawns on c7, d6, and a7. I can't kick the knight because then I lose the pawn on d6, so I thought it's best to prevent the pawn from getting to a6. So here I play a6. Andrey plays knight g3 to now prevent the f5 pawn push, which is exactly why during the game I was kind of curious as to whether I should have played f5 or not. So here I go bishop g5. Andrey plays knight f5. We trade the rook bishops on c1, and now I go g6. Again, I want to get rid of this knight on f5, but I do not take with the bishop because after pawn takes, there actually are some serious problems here. First of all, the pawn on b7 is weak, and even if I play a move like c6 here, after white plays b4, this is really quite scary. If I go knight f6, for example, to push d5, white can play rook d1. Let's say I go queen e7 here. There maybe is a move like g4 with h4 and g5 potentially, and it's very, very difficult to play for black here. So I didn't really want to allow this. So therefore I thought, well, how do I get rid of the knight? Well, I can obviously kick it away with g6. Knight e3 is played, and now I played this move c6. Another very committal move by me, attacking the pawn on a5, but I figured if I don't really play c6 here, it's going to be problematic. I know the computer says I can just kind of sit with king g7, but after white goes rook d1, now this pawn is always weak. I can't push, I can't break with b6, and white's going to be putting a knight on d5, and long term there are ideas like queen g3 and f4 as well. So with no real pawn breaks here, it feels very uncomfortable to play. So therefore I play c6 here, attacking the pawn a5, and here Andrey played rook a1 very quickly. Now I was very surprised both by this move, but also the time usage. As I said, Andrey was still moving really, really fast here, because I thought that rook cd1 was very, or not rook cd1, sorry, rook fd1 was very unclear, because after queen f5, there's maybe this move knight f5. Now, for me, I had calculated that after takes, knight f6, rook d6, I thought that after e4, I was probably okay here, but I was not 100% sure if I was okay. However, Andrey played rook a1 instantly, so now I played queen e7. Again, it's a very tough spot here. On the one hand, I want to play queen e7, rook d8 and be very solid. On the other hand, I did consider this f5 move, but I thought that after pawn takes, let's say white plays rook e1, for example. If I get f4 in here, I'm doing very, very well. But white can play queen g3 check, king h8, and now pawn to f4, preventing this pawn push. And after something like queen f6, knight e2, I thought maybe I could play knight c5, but after rook a d1, even if I go knight e4, queen e1, I just thought white's a little bit better here. I have the weak pawn on f5, weak pawn on d6. King is potentially a little bit open down the road on this diagonal from a1 to h8. So I didn't really like this position. Computer thinks it's okay, but it felt awkward, and I thought that I could end up in trouble very, very quickly. So instead I play queen e7, the logical developing move. Queen d1 was played here by Andrey. Very surprising move to me, by the way. I actually thought he would just go like rook d1, for example, and then after something like knight f6 with rook d8, I thought that white's maybe marginally better here, but it really shouldn't be anything super scary after, say, a move like king g7. However, Andrey played queen d1 right away here, and now apparently I missed something, because initially I thought this was bad because of f5, but apparently I can trade f4 takes and play knight to e5, and now black is apparently good because you can play knight g6 and f4 next move, and the computer gives black something of an advantage. It says knight f1, knight g6, rook f2, and then something like f4 here. Again, diagonal is open, black is a central pawn push, maybe queen g7. I probably should have spotted this during the game, but I still wasn't 100% sure what the plan was, so I decided to stay solid instead, and I played the move rook a d8. So here Andrey plays queen d2, and now I play this move knight f6, and Andrey played f4. In retrospect, I feel that somewhere right around here, I probably should have used more time, and I should have started to see the danger that was lurking in the position, because for some reason, I thought that after knight f6, queen d2, which happens, or sorry, rook d8, queen d2, knight f6, which happens in the game, that essentially I was completely fine because I'll be breaking with d5. Let's say white plays f3 after d5, takes, there's queen c5 check, and again, material is equal, and it's simplifying into a queen and rook's endgame, or potentially even a rook's endgame, and there should be no danger. But I completely overlooked this idea of f4, primarily because after takes, knight h5, I thought that after rook f3, queen g5, I was completely fine here. But Andrey, to his credit, realized that structurally there are some issues for white. You have weak pawns. You have weak pawn on e4. Your queenside structure isn't great here towards c4. But he did realize there is an attack possibility on the king side, because I have played g6 here, and I do not have a dark square fianchettoed bishop. So here Andrey plays rook a f1, and now I play this move, queen takes a5. Again, I didn't really want to play this move. I felt like maybe there are other options. At the same time, I didn't really see what else to do. I thought he's going g4 h4, queen f2, and it feels very iffy on the king side. So I thought, you know what, I might as well grab the material, and if I'm in trouble, I'm in trouble, but so be it. So g4 is played. I go knight g7, knight to f5, and now I play this move, queen e5. I don't know if this is the best move, but I was actually already starting to get quite scared here. At this point, when I took on f4, I already saw this idea with rook f3 and rook f1, but I didn't really see anything else that I could do to avoid it. So knight f5 is played here. Now I played queen e5. I initially thought that maybe I could take on f5, but again, after e takes f5, it feels very, very scary. Computer, I guess, says h5 is somehow holding the game here. But it looks very scary, and even bishop takes an f6 here. You feel like after something like rook h3 or king h1, you feel like there are these open h and g files towards your king, and it feels really, really scary here for black. Again, computer doesn't care, it's not worried at all, but for a human, it feels pretty tough to play. So instead, I play the logical move, queen to e5, and now here Andrey used a lot of time. Now to set the tone, sort of, or to explain what's happening, at this point in the game, Andrey had about 56 minutes, and I had 32 minutes. Now, I was definitely under pressure here, but on this move, Andrey spent, I believe, about 35 minutes. He spent, I think, till he had maybe like 21 or 22 minutes, if I'm not mistaken. So he spent about 35 minutes, and I was already getting very optimistic because there were a couple lines that I calculated. The first one is this knight e7 check, king h8, and queen h6. Now, on first glance, it looks really scary because if I play a move like bishop takes g4 to prevent this, the idea is rook h3 here with the mate. If I take on g4, white has this crushing move, knight takes g6. I can't take with the h pawn because that would put my king in check. And if I take with the pawn after rook f8, rook f8, rook f8, this is actually just checkmate here. So I was very scared at first, but then I realized after queen h6, I have this very nice move, rook f e8. And here, if white tries to play this move, rook to h3, I now can play knight to h5. And after g takes h5, I do not play bishop takes h3 because after bishop takes h3, white has rook f7, queen to d4, king h1. No checks here. The knight covers both squares, and I'm just getting checkmated on h7. However, as I realized during my analysis, I can simply take with the rook here, and after pawn takes g6, threatening mate, I take back, and if rook f8, I trade, and it's not checkmate because I can tuck the bishop on g8, and now black is completely winning. So this was the first variation that I saw when Andrey was calculating, or when I was calculating to play queen e5. Another line which doesn't work either is this very tricky move, queen h6 here, because now I can take the knight. If white plays rook to h3, I go knight h5, blocking the checkmate. You can't take the knight because I take the rook. And if you take back, well, let's just say the e-pawn, I have queen d4 check, creating the classic right triangle, of course. And if white takes back with the, let's just say the rook, for example, there are a couple ways to play this, but the easiest is queen g7. And now if white plays rook h takes h5, I do not take the rook because there's rook g5, but I can swap the queens, and then I win the rook on f5. And the last one is if white takes with this rook, I just take back, and after queen h5, let's just say a move like rook e8, there's really no attack here. I just go rook to e5, rook g5, and it's completely winning. So this is another variation, and here if white takes with a g-pawn, I actually can go knight h5 with a very simple idea of queen g7. If white plays f6 to try and checkmate here, I can very cleanly just grab the pawn on f6, and if rook f6, I take on c3, and everything is completely guarded here, and I have two extra pawns. The last line that I will show here is if white plays king to h1, I can actually go knight to f6 here, and after rook h3, I have a very simple move, rook to d7. So on fg6, fg6, white cannot take the knight on f6 because I'm in capture, and the rook guards against the checkmate. So I was actually starting to feel really, really optimistic here. As Andrey was thinking for longer and longer, I started to think I might actually win this game. So here Andrey plays knight h6, I play king h8, and now he finds a fantastic move, knight d5. Now this actually caught me completely by surprise because in this position, the only line that I had been calculating when I was looking at queen e5, and even while I was thinking, was this move knight f7. But after bishop f7, rook f7 trade, I can very simply go king g8, rook takes b7, and now after rook f8, black's actually close to winning because the king is very open. I can bring the knight to d4, for example. I can't draw my arrows evidently, but I can bring the knight to d4 or to g5, f3, h3, and this is completely winning for black. So I was already very, very optimistic, but then Andrey found this great move, knight d5, which completely threw me for a loop. And now I was in a very tough spot, because time-wise, I had, I believe, about 32 minutes, and I believe Andrey had maybe, no, I had less. I had maybe 28 or 29 minutes. I think Andrey was down to 21, and here I used only about 4 minutes to play my next move, which was g5. Now the reason I only used 4 minutes was very simple. I couldn't really do super deep calculations here, and I felt that I had to find a move and just keep going rather than trying to find a perfect solution, because I didn't see a perfect solution here. Now the obvious move the computer likes is pawn takes, and now I take back on d5, and after cd5, f5 is apparently okay, but I thought after rook e1 that I was in real trouble. I guess I have queen b2, rook e7, and then computer plays this move, rook c8, and black is completely fine, of course. Very, very tough line to find. I mean, I guess if I had found this, probably the game would have ended in a draw here, and I would have a tiebreaker tomorrow. At any rate, very, very tough. So I thought for about 4 minutes, and I decided, you know what? I'm just going to play this g5 move, because what it does is very important. Let's just say I play a random move like b5, for example. White can now go knight to f6 here and rook h3, and I'm in a lot of trouble. If I play knight e8 in this position, there's now knight takes h7, king h7, rook h3, and I'm just getting completely sauced. King g7, knight f5, say king g8, queen h6, and I made it. So I used 4 minutes, and I thought the reason that I want to play g5 is actually very rudimentary. It's that if white goes knight f6, knight e8 here, after take on h7, takes, and rook h3, I can go king g6. If knight f5, threatening rook h6 mate, I very quietly play rook h8, and now white has no way to mate. If knight e7, I can go king g7. If knight f5 back, I have king g6 or king f8. Both are fine. This is a draw. This according to computer is winning, but I have two options which are both fine. So that was basically the essence of why I played this move g5, is that I thought, first of all, I stopped knight f4, and secondly, none of these knight f6 h7 ideas work because I've closed the diagonal from d2 to h6. So here Andrey thought for a little bit and played this move queen f2. Now again, there are some computer moves here. The computer says both b4 and c3 are apparently very good for white, because black really doesn't have any moves here. Now if I take on d5 after pawn takes, you'll notice that the diagonal is kind of closed. I don't have queen b2 anymore. So after bishop takes d5, pawn takes, let's say I go f5 here, white can now just play queen takes g5, which is good. And if I play a move like well, I guess I don't even have many moves, but say I play f6, there's rook e3 trapping the queen because I don't have that b2 square anymore. So computer says c3 or b4 are very good, but it's a very tough line for a human to find. And not surprisingly, Andrey, with his time getting a little bit low here, plays a much more human move, which is queen f2 to attack the pawn on f7. So here I found a very good move, and it's probably the only move in the position where I'm not actually lost, which is to play this move f5. Now the reasoning behind playing f5 is very simple. This knight on h6 is really, really well placed, but at the same time everything is a little bit loose here. e4 and g4 are loose, the knight on d5 is loose, and by playing f5 I really transformed the position, because now if white takes with the pawn, after bishop takes, pawn takes, I can go queen f6 here, and this knight, which was so good on h6, suddenly is terrible because it has no oxygen. There are no squares for the knight to go to anymore. So I was very pleased with myself when I found this f5 move, because now, as I said, white can't really play like this, because now you have to go rook h3, and after c takes d5, your knight is stuck here on h6, as is your rook, for probably the rest of the game, and I think black should be better here. So instead, Andrey takes with a g-pawn. It's worth noting knight takes doesn't work either, because now I just eat the knight on d5, and again, without this idea of knight h6 f7, I can just trade down, and I have an extra knight here. So here Andrey takes with a g-pawn. Now I play bishop takes d5, takes with the e-pawn, of course, and now I play this important move, knight h5, activating what was a very poor knight. If we go back a few moves here, this knight on g7 is really, really bad. There really are no squares for this knight on g7, but what's happened here is I've transformed the position to where my knight is actually going to be really, really good on f4, where it's supported by the pawn on g5. Additionally, just to illustrate the point, if I get this setup here, you'll notice that the knight on h6 is out to lunch, and this f5 pawn is also potentially quite weak here down the road. So here Andrey plays rook e1, I go queen g7, attacking the knight, he plays knight g4, and now I go knight f4, creating this great outpost, and now the pawn on f5 is also quite weak. So here Andrey plays f6, I go queen d7, and now he sacks on f4. It's worth noting that h3 here would not be a good move, because I can just go h5, attacking the knight, and there are all sorts of problems for white here. So instead he sacks, and now he plays queen f4, and I play rook d8. Important move to stop rook e7. For example, if I try h5 here, this is actually not a great move because I think white can play h3, or I thought white could play h3. Apparently I have queen h7, rook e7, rook f7, which is good, but I didn't see that. At any rate, I thought rook d8 was probably just a safer move. Try to exchange the rooks. Again, if rooks come off the board here, there's really no danger for me in terms of getting checkmated because white can never go f7. The only real danger is f7 with like queen d4 or queen f6. So here there's just no way for white to break through. So I play rook d8 here, and now Andrey makes a fateful blunder. He plays this move rook f1. Now the reasoning I think behind this move is Andrey suspected earlier that he was completely winning. Now he might have been winning at one or two moments, but it was never clear cut. But I think psychologically he assumed he was winning, and by this point he already realized that the winning chances were gone, and so he was sort of checked out mentally from the game. So he plays rook f1. Now the last chance for white here would be to trade the rooks and take on d6 here, and after rook g8 h3, I think I don't have anything better to do other than simply check and make a draw. Basically that's all that I really have here. If he goes to h4, I also can just check this way. So rook e8 would have been the best move, but Andrey was low on time. As I said, mentally I think he had already checked out from the game, and so he plays rook f1 here. So now I play queen f7. Now it was a tricky spot here because for quite a while I did consider taking with the c pawn, and f7 would have been played, and I can actually trade into this endgame, but I felt that after queen e4 rook f3, probably this should be a draw with correct play, and I was really feeling that with about 10 more minutes on the clock here, I should try to find something more concrete. So I eventually found queen f7. Andrey plays king h1, and now I play queen g6, and he goes rook to g1. Now it's worth noting here that I do have to play h5. There is one very, very beautiful variation that I will show you guys just so you can see it, where I actually lose the game. So let's say I play queen e4, we trade. There's now this crazy move knight h6. If I take on f6, there's rook g8 mate. Let's say I just go move like b5. White can actually go rook g8, and knight f7 with an absolutely beautiful smothered mate. And the third point that I want to make is actually, besides this, let's just say we get a position and white doesn't see the mate. Even this position is actually also a forced win, because after rook a8, white can now go c4. Let's say I play b6. White, I'll just show this is very instructive. Rook g5, a5, white goes king g2. Again, I can't create a pass pawn here, so say I just wait. King f3, rook a8, king f4. I can never play rook a7 because rook g8 would be checkmate. So rook b8, king f5, rook a8, king f6. Let's just say rook b8. And now again, white has a beautiful smothered mate with rook g8, takes, rook g8, and knight f7. And this is the end of the game as well. So there is one last little trick here, but luckily when I calculated queen f7, king h1, queen g6, I had already seen rook g1, h5 in advance, and now the game is effectively over, because if the knight can't guard the pawn and you lose this pawn on f6, there really are no attacking chances anymore. And most importantly, if knight e5 here, I can actually just take the knight with the pawn. So now if you take my queen, I take your queen, and I have an extra rook here. And if you move the knight away to e3 like Andrey did, I just go rook f6. And now there is one line that I'll show, which is if Andrey continued the game with rook g6, rook f4, rook g3, for example, there's an absolutely beautiful sort of zugzwang, which is I play h4, attacking the rook and the knight, rook h3, and now I play this very nasty move, rook to g8 here. And after white trades, you'll notice that white can't move the knight or the rook. Both of these squares are covered, so the rook can't move anywhere. You also can't move the knight because you get mated. Same thing with d1, checkmate. So you can't move the knight, the rook, the pawn, or the king. So all these pieces are stuck. So now I can just sort of chill. After c3, I can go rook g6, b4, king g8, c5, or let's just say c5. I take, go rook g7, c4, rook g6. And again, white cannot move any piece here other than sacrificing material, or else he will get checkmated. So this is one beautiful line that I saw here at the end of the game. Andrey, though, of course, after rook f6, chose not to continue. He resigned. Again, nothing left really to do. He can play queen d4 or queen h4, but in both cases, at the very least, I go queen e4 check, creating the classic right triangle. And after queen e4, rook e4, I have two rooks versus a rook and a knight, and there isn't even an imbalance in terms of the pawn structure, so this would be an easy position to convert. So I end up winning this game rather shockingly against Andrey Esipenko in the sixth and final round. Levon, of course, was not able to keep pace with me. He got blown off the board by Grigorio Parn in the other game in the group stage. So due to the two results of me winning and Levon losing, I qualify for the semifinals, but more importantly, I am now mathematically guaranteed to qualify for the FIDE Candidates Tournament, which will be held in Spain in June and July. And for those who are wondering, The winner of that candidates tournament, which is 8 players, will earn the right to play Magnus Carlsen, the current chess world champion, in a match for the world title after that. So it's going to be a lot of fun. Obviously, I'm really looking forward to playing that event, but for right now, there's still a lot of work left to be done. We're into the semifinals. I'll play against either Shakur Mamedyarov or Vincent Kamer the day after tomorrow. But for now, just try to keep it going, keep playing good chess, and I will, of course, continue to recap my games, you guys. So I hope you've enjoyed this one along with all the other ones. And we go again, as the saying goes. So I'll see all of you guys for another recap in a couple of days. Until then, keep it real.
Hikaru, congratulations on winning your game, but also advancing to the next stage. What were your feelings during the game when you saw that Levon was about to lose?
Well, I mean, I was in my own very difficult game with a lot going on. I mean, at some point, as I said, at first I felt scared, but then I was also quite happy because basically the way the game went, either I'm like completely fine or I'm completely lost. And actually, to Andrey's credit, when he thought for maybe 35 minutes, I had completely missed this knight h6, knight d5 ideas. I looked at many other things, but I thought finding this f5 move was very resourceful. And again, Andrey was a little bit too low on time, so it just he couldn't figure it out, and yeah, I found a way to win. But again, I wasn't really paying too much attention to Levon's game. I saw I was going to lose, but I mean, if he lost and I lost, well, I mean, but we're both out of it, so I wasn't paying too much attention.
That will be the scenario that you predicted once you beat Levon first time.
No, I mean, I think, basically I just played really good chess, at least the previous 2 days. I mean, today, I don't know if I can say that I played great, but found some things. Yeah, I mean, obviously, after the start, I think there was probably like 5% chance that I would win 3 games in a row, but I did, and yeah, moving on, so pretty happy.
Moving on another note, do you have plans in the future to stream Variety?
Yeah, I'll deal with that whenever I'm home, but not for a while.
Apart from XQC, who is your favorite streamer?
There are a couple, but I would probably say right now my favorite is Lyric. So he's a variety streamer who I'm a big fan of. So that would be my favorite right now.
Just out of curiosity, how big is streaming team Hikaru?
You mean how big is my team? I mean, there are quite a few people. There are mods and others behind the scenes. So yeah, probably give or take about 10.
Okay, right. And perhaps the final one, seems like you started winning after, at the same time, I invited you for an interview and you got unbanned on Twitch. Which one was the biggest factor? I
mean, obviously, the whole situation on Twitch was very unpleasant, and I mean, it certainly cost me a lot of sleep the first couple of days. So yeah, I think that was the single biggest reason that, I mean, at least I was in a positive mood, and I think that contributed to my play over the last 3 games.
Right. Well, do have a great rest tomorrow, and good luck in the next stage.
Great. Thank you.